The wind tasted of grit and failed promises. It whipped Alara's shawl from her shoulders, a flimsy prayer against the vast, indifferent sky of the Wyoming Territory. The train, her last link to a world she understood, had become a smudge of smoke on the horizon, its mournful whistle a fading requiem for the life she had gambled away. She stood alone on the splintered platform, a solitary figure in a dun-colored dress, clutching the handle of a valise that held everything she owned. Her hope, a fragile bird she had nurtured across 1,000 miles, had died somewhere in the last hour, its desiccated corpse lying at her feet in the dust. The letter had spoken of prosperity, of a Mr. Alistair Blackwood, a rancher of considerable means seeking a wife to share his fortune. It had promised a life far from the suffocating confines of the Boston tenement where she'd buried her parents. But there was no Mr. Blackwood. There was only the sneering stationmaster who had barely glanced at her, and the raw, unending emptiness of the landscape. Despair, cold and sharp, began to work its way into her bones, a deeper chill than the wind could manage. Her gaze swept the desolate outpost, catching on a shape huddled on a bench at the far end of the platform. It was a man, folded in on himself as if trying to shrink from the world. His hat was pulled low, but she could see the tremor that racked his frame, a violent shudder that seemed to rise from the very earth. A cough tore from him, a ragged, wet sound that echoed with a terrifying finality. He was sick, gravely so. She took a tentative step closer, her own misery momentarily eclipsed by the starkness of his. He looked up as she approached, and the sight of his face stole the air from her lungs. It was a mask of fevered pallor, skin stretched taut over sharp cheekbones, his eyes burning with an unnatural brightness in shadowed sockets. He was younger than she'd expected, yet he looked as if he carried the weight of a century. The stationmaster emerged, swilling coffee from a tin mug. "That's one of the Blackwood hands," he said, his voice laced with a casual cruelty. "Been waiting here 2 days. Looks like the fever's got him for good." He spat a brown stream near the man's worn boots. "Mr. Blackwood was expecting a delivery on this train. Looks like he'll be disappointed on all counts." Alara's world tilted. A hand. Not her intended. She had been abandoned, left here with no money, no return passage, and a dying man as the only evidence that her destination had ever been real. A fresh gust of wind howled, carrying the scent of rain and the threat of a storm brewing in the bruised purple clouds to the west. She looked from the sick man's ravaged face to the hostile emptiness surrounding them. There was no one else. There was nothing else. A strange, hard resolve began to crystallize in her chest, displacing the icy fear. She had not come this far to perish on a railway platform. She had come here to survive. She walked directly to the bench, her worn skirts whispering in the dust. The man's fevered gaze locked onto hers, a flicker of lucid awareness in the delirium. She reached down, her touch surprisingly firm on his trembling arm. He flinched but did not pull away. His skin was fire. "Can you stand?" she asked, her voice quiet but clear, cutting through the wind. He gave a weak, shuddering nod. Alara looped his arm over her shoulders, taking on his unsettling weight. He smelled of sweat, dust, and sickness. She looked back at the stationmaster, her expression unreadable. Then she turned her face toward the buckboard wagon hitched nearby, the brand on its side a stylized B. "You're coming with me," she stated. It was not a question or a plea. It was a fact, declared into the unforgiving air. She was taking him home, though she had no idea if it was a home she would be allowed to enter. The journey to the Blackwood Ranch was a silent, punishing ordeal. The buckboard's wheels groaned in protest against the rutted track that wound through desolate sagebrush and stark, rock-strewn hills. Alara held the reins in one hand, her other arm bracing the sick man who slumped against her, his head lolling with every jolt. He drifted in and out of a fevered consciousness, muttering words she couldn't catch, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The promised storm had broken, and a cold, driving rain soaked them through, turning the dust to a thick, clinging mud. The landscape was a watercolor of grays and browns, immense and menacing, offering no comfort. She felt impossibly small within it, a speck of insignificance battling an elemental power. When the ranch finally came into view, it was a shock. A grand, two-story house, built of dark, sturdy timber, stood against the bruised sky, flanked by a massive barn and a network of corrals. It was a place of substance, of wealth, just as the letters had promised. Yet, as they drew closer, a sense of profound neglect became apparent. Paint was peeling from the veranda posts, a shutter hung crookedly from an upstairs window, and the surrounding yard was choked with weeds. It was a kingdom without a king, its heart still and cold. She managed to half-drag, half-carry the man, Silas. She'd heard the station master call him. Inside, the door opened into a great room dominated by a cavernous stone fireplace, the air within thick with the stale scent of dust and disuse. Fine furniture was shrouded in white cloths, like ghosts guarding a tomb. With strength she didn't know she possessed, she guided him up a wide staircase and into the first bedroom she found. It was a master suite, masculine and stark, with a heavy four-poster bed. She lowered him onto the mattress and he collapsed, his body surrendering completely to the illness. For hours she worked. She found a pump in the kitchen and hauled buckets of water, found linens in a deep cedar chest, and located a basin and cloths. She bathed his fiery skin, her movements efficient and devoid of sentiment. It was a task, a purpose, a wall she built against the terror threatening to overwhelm her. As she tended to him, she took stock of her prison, or her sanctuary. She did not yet know which. In the desk of a study downstairs, tucked away in a ledger, she found them. Copies of the letters sent to her, written in a neat, decisive script. Beneath them were other papers, ranch business, with notations in a completely different hand. A scrawling, almost illegible chicken scratch she recognized from the signature on the letters. Alistair Blackwood. The man in the bed was not the man who had written to her. Her blood ran cold. The next afternoon, the sound of heavy boots on the veranda sent a jolt of alarm through her. A man filled the doorway, broad-shouldered and thick-set, his face weathered and his eyes small and shrewd. "Who in the hell are you?" he demanded, his gaze sweeping over her with open hostility. "I am Alara," she said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "The station master said he was from this ranch. I brought him home." The man, who introduced himself as Brody, the foreman, sneered. "You brought him? He's a dying man. You should have left him." Brody's eyes darted toward the staircase, a flicker of something calculating in their depths. "Mr. Blackwood is away. There's no place for you here. I'll see you get a ride back to the station in the morning." He was dismissing her, erasing her. Alara straightened her spine. She thought of the different handwriting, of the neglect, of the sick man upstairs. She met his gaze, her own clear and unyielding. "I will not be leaving," she said quietly. "I am tending to Mr. Blackwood." She used the name deliberately, a challenge. A flicker of surprise, then fury, crossed Brody's face. He could not very well throw out the woman nursing the ranch's owner, however close to death he might be. The battle line had been drawn in the dusty air between them. The days bled into one another, measured not by the sun, but by the rhythm of Silas's fever. Alara's world shrank to the confines of the sickroom. It was a quiet, relentless campaign against the illness that held him captive. She spooned thin broth between his cracked lips, changed sweat-soaked linens, and sat through long nights, listening to the rasp of his breathing, the sole sound in the cavernous house. He was a presence more than a person, a duty she performed with a grim, methodical focus. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a change began. The fever's fire cooled to embers. The delirium receded, replaced by long stretches of quiet lucidity. He would watch her, his gaze following her as she moved about the room, a silent, unnerving scrutiny. There was no gratitude in his eyes, not yet, only a kind of stark assessment. The dialogue between them was sparse, fragments of necessity. Water, she would bring it. More light, she would draw the curtains. One afternoon he spoke a full sentence, his voice a dry rasp. The garden is dead, she paused, a bowl of soup in her hands. She had noticed the plot behind the house, a tangle of withered vines and determined weeds. Yes, she replied simply and left it at that. The next day, after ensuring he was settled with water and a blanket, she went out into the weak afternoon sun and began to work the soil. She pulled weeds until her hands were raw, cleared the dead growth, and turned the earth over, breathing in its damp, promising scent. She was not just tending a garden. She was reclaiming a small piece of this desolate place, making it hers. She was planting roots, whether she would be allowed to keep them or not. Brody remained a shadow at the edge of her new reality. He appeared every few days, his presence filling the house with a sour tension. He would ask after Silas with a false solicitude that made Alara's skin crawl, his eyes always trying to gauge how much strength the man in the bed had regained. He questioned her presence, her purpose, with a thinly veiled contempt. "Still playing nursemaid?" he'd ask, a sneer twisting his lips. "Don't get too comfortable. This ain't your house." One evening he overstepped. He found her in the kitchen, stoking the fire in the wood stove, and blocked her path. He smelled of whiskey and resentment. "He's never gonna get better, you know," Brody slurred, his voice low and menacing. "This ranch needs a strong hand." My hand, he reached out, his thick fingers closing around her upper arm in a bruising grip. "Maybe you should start thinking about who's going to be in charge." Fear, cold and immediate, shot through her. She tried to pull away, but his grip was iron. "Let go of me," her voice was a strained whisper. Before Brody could respond, a new sound cut through the tension. A voice from the doorway of the great room, weak but laced with cold steel. "I said," Silas repeated, his voice gaining a sliver of its lost command. "Leave her be." Alara and Brody both turned. Silas was standing there, leaning heavily against the doorframe, clad only in his trousers and a loose shirt. He was a specter, gaunt and pale, but his eyes burned with a fire that had nothing to do with fever. It was the fire of ownership, of authority returning. Brody's hand dropped from her arm as if it had been burned. He stared, speechless, at the man he had clearly believed would never stand again. The power in the house had just shifted irrevocably. In the wake of that confrontation, the very air in the house seemed to change. Brody's visits ceased. The oppressive silence of sickness was replaced by a quiet space of mutual healing. Silas grew stronger each day. The gaunt hollows of his face began to soften, and he moved with a slow, deliberate grace, reclaiming his home one room at a time. He began to eat with her at the small kitchen table, the long, formal dining room still shrouded and ignored. Their silences were no longer empty, but filled with a dense, unspoken understanding. He watched her mend a torn curtain with small, neat stitches. She watched him stare out at the vast expanse of his land, his expression a mixture of pain and determination. They were two solitary souls orbiting one another, their shared hardship a form of gravity. One evening, as a chill wind rattled the window panes, they sat before a crackling fire in the great room's massive hearth. It was the first fire she had built in there, and the flames pushed back the shadows, breathing warmth and life into the dormant space. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then, his voice, low and steady, broke the quiet. "The sickness came on fast," he said, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "Pneumonia." Brody sent the doctor away. Said he would manage things. He paused, the firelight catching the hard line of his jaw. "He was managing my affairs right into his own pockets, isolating me." Waiting, he finally turned his head, and his eyes, clear and deep, met hers. "I did not write those letters, Alara." Brody did. "I imagine he thought he was hiring a desperate woman who would be a pliable witness to my death, someone he could easily discard." Alara felt a strange stillness settle over her. All the pieces clicked into place. The cruelty, the neglect, the deception. "He miscalculated," she said, her voice soft. A faint, sad smile touched Silas's lips. "He did. He wrote for a bride. He got a savior instead." He looked away, back to the fire, a muscle working in his jaw. This is not the life you were promised. It is not the life you deserve. When I am fully recovered, I will see that Brody is removed, and I will give you whatever you need. Passage back east. Enough money to start again. Properly, the offer hung in the air between them. An honorable discharge, a payment for services rendered. Alara looked around the room, at the warm glow on the polished wood, at the mended curtain hanging straight and true, at the man beside her, brought back from the edge of the grave by her own 2 hands. She thought of the Boston tenement, of a life of constrained servitude. Then she thought of the raw, untamed beauty of the land, of the defiant green shoots in her garden, of the quiet strength she had discovered within herself in this hard place. She had arrived a desperate girl, a piece of human male. She was no longer that person. "No," she said, her voice firm with a conviction that surprised them both. He turned back to her, his expression questioning. She met his gaze without flinching, her own reflecting the firelight. "I am not going back. This is my home now." The words settled between them, a foundation stone laid for a future yet to be built. It was not a declaration of love, but something stronger, more vital. It was a statement of partnership, a pact of resilience forged in the crucible of despair. In the quiet of the great room, with the wind howling outside, 2 solitary figures sat together, no longer alone, ready to face the dawn.